Welcome back to Education on Fire. Today I'm chatting to Marie-Claire Parsons, the project lead for Harry's Rainbow, a charity that supports bereaved children in Milton Keynes here in the UK. She has 30 years experience in schools, culminating in founding a 6-school federation and being the executive head teacher. She has been a family liaison officer, education lead and beneficiary lead for the charity, and has just completed leading on an art project where 15 young people explored their grief through graffiti. Harry's Rainbow offer activity-based support groups for children bereaved of a parent or sibling. Set up by Odette Mould MBE almost 15 years ago after the death of her twin, Harry. Hi, Marie-Claire. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Education on Fire podcast. This is a charity which I came across because I was doing a co-working day with somebody who'd been involved in it, and they were chatting about it, and I just thought it's such an important thing. It's such a supportive thing for the community, and it's a relatively local charity to me. So I thought it'd be great for us to be able to share the work that you do and give people a little bit of an insight of how you can support them given their circumstances as well. So yeah, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, not at all. Thanks for having me on.
So can you take us into a little bit of the history of the charity? How long has it been around, and kind of why was it originally set up?
Yeah, of course. So it's actually the 15th year anniversary next year. So it's been going for 15 years, and it was set up by Odette Mould MBE. And it was set up because very tragically her son Harry, who is a twin with Jessica, he was taken into hospital with asthma and very sadly died and didn't come home. I think they were about 5 at the time, very young. And Odette was passionate about finding some support for Jessica. And what transpired was the family had to travel about 45 minutes to an hour on a Saturday morning to get some support for Jessica. And Odette, if you've met Odette, then you will know that she is a very passionate lady, very driven. And she decided no child in Milton Keynes was ever going to have that issue again where there was no support. So she pulled all her energy and grief into developing Harry's Rainbow, the charity, to offer support for bereaved children in Milton Keynes and surrounding Milton Keynes. So if a child can travel and they can get to the groups, then that's the surrounding boundary, if you like. So that's how it started. And like I say, it's the 15th year anniversary next year.
And so in terms of that support, in terms of people being able to sort of attend in person, what does that look like? I know you have there are projects, there's sort of memory boxes, sort of sort of the breadth of what it is and how that supports people, and I guess is sort of is appropriate for different ages as well.
Yeah, so we have our rainbow groups. So our rainbow groups are for children age 1 to 11. That's the easiest way to put it. They're all activity-based groups. So the rainbow groups, the children come and they partake in activities, they partake in food, and it's just a chance for them to do something, but be able to talk about their loved one in a very relaxed, creative atmosphere. Because talking about grief and bereavement is really hard. And it's particularly hard for people in the UK. We just don't talk about death. And that stiff upper lip, we just don't talk about grief. So that's our rainbow groups. And then we have our youth groups, which is age 11 to 18-ish. And again, they come and they have activities to do, age appropriate activities. And then we call it our YADI, which is our young adults group or drop-in group. So that's from 18 to 25. So we support children from 1 to 25 through monthly groups. The parents are given a cup of coffee. So the parents tend to come just for the rainbow groups. They don't come for the youth groups. But sometimes it's the only time that somebody's made them a cup of tea. They're juggling family, they're juggling grief, they're juggling work. And for them to sit with other parents and be able to have that conversation about how they're feeling with other people that understand is really empowering. It sounds like it might be a really miserable place to come, but actually it is the most joyous place to come. And if anybody ever wants to just come and see what we do and visit, please do, because it's a room full of people who are grieving in some of the most tragic circumstances, but they're all there just gaining energy and positivity from each other. So those are the groups, and that's just one part of what we do. We also offer a summer trip and a Christmas trip. So that's for the first 2 years that you've been registered, because we have a huge number of families. We also do a Christmas party and a summer party. So this time of year is really busy.
Hmm.
If families that have registered have been bereaved that year, they are also offered a hamper. We've just had our hamper evening, which I can tell you about, which again is an amazing evening. What else do we do? Oh, we have a caravan. So we call it our retreat. It's on the south coast. And every family is allowed a 2 to 3 night stay in our caravan on the south coast. And that's, just a way to get away from it all. And one family said that it was just so lovely actually to be somewhere where no one knew them. Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's easier just to make new memories when nobody's asking you how you are. Yes, so we have that. Memory boxes. So our memory boxes are actually co-provided by another charity, and they are given out to every child who registers. Um, and that has just a few little things in there already, and then the opportunity to put anything that they can remember their loved one by. Trying to think, I think that's about everything. We do lots of other things in between, but that encapsulates most
Yeah.
of what we do.
I just like to sort of say, I can imagine what the atmosphere is like there. I was involved in the Cynthia Spencer hospice as part of their chaplaincy team for a while, and I had the same experience. It was that sense of, you would imagine it looks and feels like this because people are obviously coming to the end of their life, but it's an absolute privilege to be around people and support people in that part of their life, but also the fact it's so life affirming in so many ways, because there's nothing like facing these sorts of challenges where you suddenly realize what life is because it becomes very real, very, very quickly. And so I can, having not been to your charity, I can really sort of understand what that's like. And the other thing that struck me is, like you say, families wanting to be anonymous sometimes so that you can just be yourselves wherever you are in that given day, or like say those couple of days that you might be away. But then also, like say, having people to share it with who understand where you are without needing it to be another family member or something which is sort of intertwined with your sort of immediacy, if it is with, like say, whether it's your colleagues or whether it's your family, because there's a certain, not an expectation is the wrong way of putting it, but there's a way of being, or how you think you should be in order to make it okay for other people, let alone yourself, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, very much so. And I think that's the thing in the UK. And, we're talking education. Thank goodness it's now come into the curriculum.
Mm.
And, we can talk more about that in a moment. But um, we don't talk about death. We know it's going to happen, but we don't plan for it. We don't prepare our children that this is going to happen. We don't know when. And I think that's the thing. Um, and like you say, for them to come together and be able to just be open. And I think one of the things that amazed me when I first started, so my journey with Harry's Rainbow is I started as a volunteer to support schools with training for bereavement and grief. That morphed into another role where I was an family liaison officer. Then I was a bereavement lead, and now I'm project lead. So that's my history. But one of the things that first or really amazed me when I was a family liaison officer with the youth group is actually how much humor is involved in grief. And because they almost have this secret group, and from an outsider's point of view, you think, oh, that's very dark what you're saying. But to them, it's no, we're in this club together.
Mm.
And that's really empowering for them. Because if you imagine a child in a school, and actually I can give you, if it's okay to
Of
give you my
course. Yeah.
experience. So my experience, and part of the reason that I worked for Harry's Rainbow, is that my father died when I was 15. So he'd been ill, he'd had cancer, and he died for he was ill for 2 years, sorry, and then died. And at the time, there was absolutely no support at all. And I went into school the very next day, and my tutor said to me, "Oh, can I have a word?" And taken into the office, and we sat one side of a big wooden desk, and she said, no, I'm going to quote exactly how she said it. She said, "I hear you've had a bit of bad news." And I said, no, because at that point, I couldn't even justify it to myself. I couldn't even, it didn't seem real to me. It had been less than 24 hours. And she went, oh, well, anything you need, let me know. And that was the full extent of my support. So imagining a child or a young person in a class with their peers, being the only one in that class who's been bereaved of a parent or sibling, that's incredibly lonely and incredibly confusing. You don't know what to say, who to speak to, how to talk about it. People avoid you. People walk across the street when you're bereaved because other people, they don't want to upset you and they don't know what to say. And this is coming back to the point that we don't talk about it in this country. Um, so for those young people, especially teenagers, to have this, yeah, we're in this together. It's really awful, but we're in it together. Did you feel like that? Did that happen at the funeral? Oh, that happened to me. Oh gosh, I'll tell you something funny. That is so empowering for them. And that's why we do what we do at Harry's Rainbow. Yeah, we aim to give children a brighter tomorrow for that reason, to say you're not alone.
And it is amazing, isn't it? Like I say, things have changed, but like I say, not enough. As in, if you don't understand what to say or how to say it, then people just, like say, you have that sort of wide berth, or like say that sort of cross the road. And my thought has always been that the only thing you can really be is yourself. And so if you're being kind and authentic, then that's the most important thing. And you will say the right thing for everybody concerned, otherwise you'll end up overthinking everything. And like I say, you end up not doing anything. And the other piece of advice I was given, which was one of the best things I ever heard, was that if you're not sure what to say, just ask someone how they are today.
Yeah.
Because today might be fine, and it's like, yeah, I've had a really good day, and it might be that today is just one of those days where you feel like you've been hit by a lorry in a way that you don't know, because yesterday was different, and you can't identify with that, but it makes it all very immediate, and it makes it in the moment, and that's a much easier answer for the person that you're talking to them, because they can say, this is how I am today. Because just the kind of how are you is just like an open-ended question. It's like, well, we can't even begin to have this conversation because we're just sort of chatting. And I think the specifics of how you go about talking to people are really key. And if you've never heard those sorts of things or been involved in that, then how would someone know how to have those conversations?
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly what I'm saying about we don't embrace it in the UK. And that's where the training in schools is so important. And like I say, we'll talk about that, as we go along. But um, that question, how are you, is so open-ended, isn't it? And how many times have we stood there on the street and wanted to say, do you really want to know how I am? Have you really got time for this? But how are you today? That's saying I'm there. I understand, or I don't, maybe not. I don't understand what you're going through, but I've got an empathy. I'm standing beside you. Um, and I'm just really interested to know how you are today. And that's, if you want to tell me, that's great. I'm here. And if you don't, that's also great. And I think, for peripheral, not family, but friends, it's just checking in with people,
Yeah.
bereaved people, because certainly what I found, what my mum found, and what a lot of our families find is that up until the funeral, everybody, the support is there. People are bringing you casseroles and cookies and knocking on your door and flowers. Actually, that's not when you need the support as much. It's after the funeral when everyone's forgotten and everyone's gone back to their own lives naturally.
Yeah.
But that's when you need the support because grief is lifelong. And I think, everybody's been through grief, but it can be very different if you've lost that parent or sibling at a young age. That grief is grief, but there are degrees of it in a different way as well. And that post funeral is when it's the most lonely time
And
because it's not, let's just get on with life.
yeah.
It's there forever.
And I think if you think back to either your own children or your experience as a child, what you experienced during primary school is different to where you were when you were going through secondary school and beyond. So just even if you've not had that experience directly, I think understanding that you remember that your perception of life was different at that point. So like you say, the reaction is going to be different just because you are at a different age and what you're able to take from that. So in terms of the, like, say, the education and the school side of things, what is that kind of support that you're able to give, and how does that sort of manifest itself, sort of from someone who maybe is having to or wanting to bring this more in or have that support within a school setting?
So as I said, that started when I did volunteering Paris Rainbow. Having worked as a teacher and then I was a head teacher and executive head, I knew how important it was for teams, staff teams, to understand how to deal with a bereavement. So what it that's morphed over the last 3 years, and we now have somebody called we affectionately call them our ELDO, which is the Education Liaison Development Officer. So ELDO is much easier off the tongue than the
Yeah.
long phrase. Um, and basically we will come into school and we will train however many members of staff are needed. So we can either do groups of staff or we can do a whole staff like an inset day or after school. And we come in and we just talk about how to deal with bereavement. So from that first call that normally the business manager gets to say something awful's happened, to it being passed to the head teacher, to the head teacher having to talk to the team to say this has happened, and then how to interact and talk to the children and prepare them that this has happened to their friend. Or it might be the child that's died, and that's happened very recently in Milton Keynes, several times, that a class have lost their classmate. But the language, the types of language to use, and we say use death, died, use grief, bereavement, because again, we want to be very kind, and that's great. But actually saying something like, well, mum is gone to sleep, she's gone to sleep forever. If you think of that for a small child, that's incredibly frightening. Because one, well, what happens if I go to sleep? Will I go to sleep forever? What happens if daddy goes to sleep? So it sets up a whole host of other issues, even though that person is trying to be very kind. We have to be really, really culturally sensitive as well. So saying things like, oh, dad is an angel now, which is lovely, lovely thought. But actually, culturally, with Milton Keynes and surrounding areas are very diverse. Culturally, that might not fit. So one of the things we say is talk to the family. What is it they want as well? So we can advise and we can guide, and we can say, you need to talk to the children, and you need to, we advise that you say this, but actually culturally that might not fit. So you've got to go with the family as well. So basically we come in and we talk about grief and bereavement and how to talk to the children, the sorts of activities and tasks that they can do to support that, how to check in with the child and with the family, and that this is not just until the funeral, this is ongoing. And then that other bit about noticing behaviour. So every school's got behaviour policy. These should never be blanket, because a child who's been bereaved may start acting differently, may start being angry, may start acting up because they don't know how to deal with their feelings. So we say you've got to take that into account. Don't then give them a detention or whatever it is because they've kicked off in class. I'm making it very simplistic,
Yeah, of course.
because
Yeah.
actually you've got to find out what's going on for that child. I mean, I remember sitting in class staring out of the window, being told off for staring out the window when I was 15. But I remember it vividly. It was in science, and I remember staring out of the window. I was just trying to make sense of what had happened, because nobody talked about it. It was all very, your father's died, end of. Um, and I remember that vividly, and then being told off, and then feeling quite cross because actually, I was staring out the window for a reason. I wasn't being naughty.
Mm.
So that's part of the training as well, is to say, so bereavement isn't a mental health. It's not considered a mental health or ill health issue. But if we don't talk to these young people, it can transpire into a mental health breakdown. Because you imagine, especially teenagers with hormones and all sorts of things going on and friendships, to have that whirling around and that confusion, that's a real toxic mix of emotions going on. So that's part of the training is, be sensitive to what's going on for these young people.
And I think, like you sort of mentioned there about the staring out of the window, it's always that sense for me of you on one side, you're sat there with this whole sort of life changing experience, probably thinking, what's the point of even being sat here? Because I should be doing something else or need the support, or, you know, I'm just doing my normal life in inverted commas, and we seem to have been moving on. And then I think most people who've experienced, whether it's a parent or someone who's died in their family, is that immediately afterwards you suddenly have the reality that life still happens, you know. So
Yeah.
we're here going, oh, well, I suppose I need to make dinner or have a cup of tea or take the bins out or whatever it happens to be. And it's a very, very strange sort of I don't know, sort of fence that you're straddling in some ways, because there is this reality going on as well as this complete sort of mind shift or experience or emotional change that's happening at the same time. And that's, like I say, you need the grace and the understanding and the real compassion for people to know that that's not something that just changes overnight, like you say, or because you've had one conversation.
Absolutely. And there's a lovely image. I want to say it's Kubler-Ross, but I might be wrong, so don't quote me on that one. Um, but lots of people say, well, it'll get better over time. You know, it will get better, it'll diminish. But actually, this image is brilliant, and it's three jars, and there's a black ball in the jar. So to begin with, the black ball fills the jar. So that is the start of the journey of grief. That actually the grief just fills your whole life.
Mhm.
And that understanding that actually that could be for years, it's different for every single person. And the five stages of grief doesn't exist. I'll talk about that in a moment. But anyway, going back to the jars. So the black ball fills the jar. And the image is the black ball doesn't change size, but what happens is life grows around the jar. So there's more space in the jar, and then there's more space in the jar, but the actual grief doesn't change. That doesn't diminish. It's just that over time, life can grow around it again. Because you're absolutely right. You know, from my personal experience, and the families and young people have said similar, that that moment when you wake up, that tiny fraction of a moment where everything in the world is okay, and then you wake up and your conscious mind kicks in, and there's this awful black shadow hanging over us. You know, that is just all consuming. You've probably come across it, and certainly we've come across it at Harry's Rainbow and me personally, that when you're certainly in those first couple of years, you start laughing at something, and there's this sudden, why am I laughing? I'm not allowed to be happy. This awful thing's happened. So that's really confusing. How am I now supposed to be with this new world? And so that's where that jar, we show that in the training, that actually life grows around the grief over time. But just like you said earlier, it can hit you like a ton of bricks, even 40 years on.
Mm.
And you think, where did that come from? And it'll be a smell or a sound or something that suddenly, wow.
And I think that's the sense, isn't it, that we get very much into this linear world, you know, we're this age, this is our part of life. But, you know, there's a whole different podcast about how maybe that's not quite the same, and how we're sort of just morphing around all of these things. So in terms of people that are trying to be within schools and they have maybe someone that they're trying to support, is it just a question of understanding the sorts of things that we've then spoken about, but then how do you then sort of fit that, like you say, within the policies, within the way that it works? Because a little bit like you said, that lead up to the funeral, it's like everything's okay in as much as we accept that life is different for the moment, and then the funeral finishes and then life carries on. You know, for someone who's been through the funeral now, they're back at school, for example, and then, oh, it's okay because we're empathetic and we're supporting you now. But like you say, it might be next year or the year after or the year after that, and by which time, like you say, the policy kicks in because this is just a bit of history now. So how does that sort of fine balance work? And is that a sort of a personal thing, or the people related to that, or is there sort of a practical thing within the education system or schools that can sort of help in that way?
One thing that I think it would be really important, and it's definitely not something that happens per se, but I personally think that a bereaved child should have a one-page profile. So children with SEND have one-page profiles, but actually, if they had a one-page profile that just went up with them through the school that was on the file to say this child was bereaved by on, then every teacher that comes into contact with that child will have that in their armor, their toolkit, if you like. Because one of the things that is really important is just to check in with the child around anniversary times. Anniversaries year on year are really hard times. I mean, particularly for the first 2 years, particularly for the first year when you go through every single thing for the
Yeah.
first time. Then the second year, but beyond that, so my father died 9th of November. Actually, if somebody had just checked in and said, where the anniversary is coming up, how are you? Are you doing anything? You're marking it. I would then be able to say, oh, I'm fine. No, it's okay. But at least somebody's checked in. Or I might say, oh yeah, we're going out for a meal as a family or whatever it is. So I would advocate for that there is a record of the bereavement, because one thing that the government doesn't do, the government doesn't hold any records of children and young people that have been bereaved. There is no data. There was I can't think what the right word is, but there was a push to try and get that through the government last year and it didn't happen. Um, so as a result of that, it's almost there's no statutory guidance around it. But I would advocate for that in schools because actually it's important. So that's one thing that I think is really important. The other thing, like you say, policies. Policies are only good as the date they're written, but to have maybe a two-page bereavement policy to say, if a bereavement happens, this is what we do. This is the sort of language we use. These are the people you can contact. This is the signposting for the families. And this is what you do ongoing would actually be really helpful. Because I know when I was a head teacher, we didn't have a bereavement policy. And it wasn't until we had a very sudden bereavement during COVID that my brain went, oh, gosh, I wish we'd had that. Because as a head, when you're in that situation, trying to deal with a bereavement and everything that you've got to manage around that, actually to be able to pick up that checklist and go, oh, yeah, actually, that's what I
Mm.
needed to do. That's who I needed to call. That's who I now need to support the family with. So, like in Milton Keynes, in the bereavement policy, put Harry's Rainbow in there. This is a charity that's out there to support. Register yourself, get them to give you a call. So that's what I would say for schools is actually a useful, maybe let's not call it a policy, let's call it a bereavement checklist
Mm.
or toolkit, because it's more likely to be used, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, you want as much bandwidth, whether you're, like, say, the head teacher or somebody who's working directly with a child in that scenario, because you want to be giving all of yourself. And like say, you're still a professional, you're still doing what you need to do, but to have the bandwidth to know, as long as I do what, like say, is on this checklist, then I know that's taken care of. I don't have to be overthinking the rest of that, and I can spend the energy I need in whichever way that sort of comes through for that child. And we won't go down this rabbit hole, but it does just suddenly thought to me, it's really important from a government point of view to know what certain children did in the second week of May when they're in year 6. Less important to know about how they are in one of the most incredible things that can happen to a child's life, going through a bereavement. Anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole.
We won't go down that route, but we could do, and we could spend a whole new podcast on that one.
Exactly.
But there is a big point in that, and particularly not particularly for, but where there, so some families whose parent has died, but they've been ill, and there is a chance to say goodbye is one thing. The families also that have lost a parent or a child very immediately, so very tragic circumstances and suicide. And we have got registered young people that have taken their life. We're talking teenagers, and trying to manage and comprehend everything that then comes with that as well. That's huge ongoing. There's a lot of trying to unpick. There's a lot of guilt surrounding that. It's not, there shouldn't be, but there is. There's lots of unanswered questions. There's no chance to say goodbye. There's no chance to understand. Actually, if you think about that happening to a child or a sibling, So a child that's lost a parent through suicide or a sibling, taking that with you through your life is enormous, and the layers build and build and build and build. So schools can have a huge impact in supporting those young people. Schools and colleges, anyone in education. I mean, we could talk universities as well,
Yeah.
but that's a different story. But um, they can have a huge positive impact. But I do think it takes conscious thought.
And I was going to mention the relationship side of this, because you can, losing a parent must be, and I have no experience of this, different than losing your brother or your sister. And like you say, whether it's long because of illness or whether it's happened as a sort of literally overnight, so to speak. So I'm just curious, in sort of in your experience, how does that differ in terms of how you support somebody, or some of the ways that the relationships and the support that you give are going to be different in those sort of different scenarios.
Yeah, that's a really good question actually, because if a child has lost a sibling, they have got their parents there to give that immediate support and comfort. Um, if they've lost the parent, they've only got one parent who's trying to juggle everything. And in fact, we've got a beneficiary who summed it up beautifully and said, um, "Mum, mum must find it really hard because she's having to be mum and dad. She has to tell me off and be my comforter."
Mm.
And that really was really powerful when she said that. This is a teenager. Whereas a sibling carries a lot of guilt themselves. I should have been there for my sibling. What could I have done? So the dynamic is also different because the parents are grieving the loss of a child, and that's not the natural trajectory in any sense of the word. But the child is suffering that loss as well. And what we find is the child doesn't want to upset the parents by saying how sad they are. So that there is a different dynamic there as well. Um, I think in terms of the support, it's for a child that's lost a sibling. I mean, you're always supporting the family and the child. That's part
Yeah.
of Harry's Rainbow. We're there to support the child, but obviously we support the families as well. Um, but I think with a child that's lost a sibling, it's talking about, but how do you feel about your brother not being there, your sister not being there? Tell me about them from your point of view. Because one of the things, siblings fight. Let's be honest. I don't know many siblings that don't argue at some point in their life. Sometimes that death may have happened after an argument, and you can imagine that is enormous to carry with them. So it's really talking to them about, actually, but that's quite normal for you to argue. I don't want you to feel sad that you have arguments because that's just what siblings do. And yeah, it takes a lot of support. One thing we do work with is Harris Rainbow also work with some therapies. So we work with Arthur Ellis, who are a mental health support charity in Milton Keynes, and we also work with some play therapists. So for children that need that extra support, we've got that as well. And I think for schools, I know how hard it is to access support, but actually having this toolkit, maybe with local support on there that can be contacted, not immediately, but at some point, especially for the child to be able to just offload and for the therapist to try and unpick what's
Mm.
going on for them. That's really important.
I think, like you said, that the last conversation, the last experience, or whatever that happens to be, it just reminded me again, like you said, of the anniversaries. And I think sometimes you can also overlook the slightly grayer anniversaries. So, like you say, you remember the day someone died, you might remember the funeral day. What you don't remember is the week before when something happened. And that kind of, there's something going on today, but you're just not quite sure why it's had that impact. And I think sometimes just spending some time trying to remember what those things are, because it can give you a little bit of solace, I think, in that sense
Mm.
of just, I can see why, my dad died in November, but actually something happened. There's something in October that always seems to happen this time of year, but I'm not quite sure. And I think some of
Definitely.
those sort of grayer dates, that's probably not the best phrase, but you understand what I mean, have a really big impact
Yeah.
too.
No, I absolutely agree. And first-hand experience over the years when the fireworks started to when fireworks
Yeah,
start, because they start from about the end of October, don't they?
yeah.
And I vividly, and still now, 40 years on, I something triggers in me and I feel really quite down and a bit introverted, and I can't work it out until I realize it's the fireworks. And what happened was the night, so that we went to the hospital, saw my dad, um, and traveling back down the motorway, the fireworks. So 9th of November, yeah, so the 8th of November, there was a firework display down the M25 somewhere. So I connected those feelings of seeing him in the hospital, although I didn't know it was the last time, but I connected the feelings of the fireworks with those feelings of seeing my dad for the last time. And so every single year, that is that build up, sort of 5 to 6, 7, 8 days
Mm.
before the anniversary. But you're right, actually, and then noticing, especially with children, they've gone a bit quiet. I wonder what's going on. Or they're acting out what's going on. Oh, the anniversary is coming up. Because you don't always know it. You don't always know what's going on until you consciously think, oh, yeah, that date's coming up,
Yeah,
especially years down the line.
yeah.
But no, that's a really good point.
And and I think one of the final things I'd like just to sort of make sure that we cover is that sense of the timing thing, isn't it? Because I think very often we want to compartmentalize these things, and it's like, this happened, like say 40 years ago or 10 years ago, and the fact that it looks different over time. You feel different over time, but not necessarily in a linear way. And also I think just realizing that if you imagine this is an ongoing relationship, like say with death, with grief, that's always changing, I think that maybe then is supportive in terms of how you then speak to somebody in whatever your role, whether you like say you're a parent, you're a sibling, you're a head teacher, whatever those things are. Because I think at that moment it all becomes very real. Like we said, a little bit like the saying, "How are you today?" That seems important when you know someone's just lost somebody, but maybe not so much further down the line.
Mm. Yeah. In fact, I was thinking of, whilst you were saying that, thinking of an example. So Jess, Harry's twin, and she turned 21, I think it was last year, might have been the year before, time disappears. And I was having a conversation with her about, well, how are you feeling? And she said, I feel really weird. I want to celebrate, but I don't. And just that conversation around, Harry would have been 21 and what would he have been like? And I would we still have been friends, and would he have been into football, and what would he have looked like? And so that was really important to have that conversation around that for her. I thought of something else actually whilst you said that. So we've one of our beneficiaries read the most fantastic poem. I did a year-long project called Grieffiti, where 15 young people created huge, well, big canvases through the form of graffiti to explore and express their grief. Amazing. It was brilliant. Had an exhibition, really, really good. Art, fantastic for exploring
Mm.
emotions. Anyway, one of our beneficiaries who has been very, very introvert found bereavement very challenging. At the exhibition, read the most fantastic poem. I mean, no dry eye in the house, but it was all about her brother had died. I think he was 9, something like that, quite young. She was only about 4 at the time, but she's grown up wondering, and her poem was I wonder, and it was I wonder what my brother would look like. I wonder whether he'd be straight or gay. I wonder whether we'd eat the same things. And it was just like, wow. She was 4 at the time, yet she's grown up to now being 15, 16, still wondering. And I think that's that loss of and the unanswered questions. Well, I wonder what they would be like. What would they be doing? That's really powerful.
And and there's something about that everything being encapsulated in, like say, in a moment of time, isn't it? This person only ever got to this age. I remember
Yes,
them as a 10-year-old, as a, you know, a parent in their 30s or
yes,
40s.
yes,
And then
yes,
all of a sudden, like you say, you're either the same age or slightly
yeah,
in that same realm, or, you know, they wouldn't be a child anymore, but I only ever knew them as a child. And
yes.
that's a very, like I say, it's a very interesting thing to be aware of, and having those conversations, I can imagine, are incredibly powerful and supportive, because if everyone's perception is different, then it's only by having those conversations that allows that kind of collective understanding to come out.
And I don't think this particular young person would have been able to do that without that support of Harry's Rainbow,
Mm.
without the support. I mean, the school support has been okay, could be a lot better. One of the things that I'd really advocate for is, and it sounds dark, but it's not, but actually in schools to have a bereavement support group
Hmm.
once a month or once every 2 weeks, that pastoral team, to have that chance for bereaved young people to come and just be with other bereaved young people. Because one person starts talking and you cannot stop them, because they all start going, yeah. And it's this amazing conversation between them where you are an outsider, you do nothing. And it's, oh, that happened. Yeah, that happened to me. Did that happen to you? Oh gosh, yeah, that happened to me. Did that and that is really powerful. And like I say, this young person, to be quite honest, I was very concerned about her a year ago, but to see how she has grown and to be able to stand and read this very emotional poem to a room full of people, that's the power of support.
Mm.
And without it, without that support in schools and externally, there are a lot of young people that are not going to thrive through grief. That sounds funny because no one thrives through it, but you can thrive
Yeah.
if that support is there. And that's why the training is so important in schools. And it's not a tick box exercise. Oh yeah, we've done that training. This is really important, and I think it should be just like safeguarding training every year. Let's just check in.
Yeah.
Have you had any bereavements? Because actually, teachers suffer that grief of the bereavement of a child in their class. That is very rarely dealt with, but that is really real.
And I think also, I think as you mentioned about the person who read the poem, is the fact that you need to hold people where they are. So, like you say, if you were holding them a year ago, I mean, sort of in that sort of emotional kind of sort of glove, so to speak. But if you then could see how that was then going to look a year later, you're not fixing, you're not doing anything. You're just, whatever the support they need from a professional standpoint, like say in the training standpoint, it's really important. But just to allow them to be where they are and be whatever you need to be to support that person. And like you say, and I guess that's where the being involved in something like Harry's Rainbows over a number of weeks, months, years becomes important, because other people start to see other people's journeys as well. And so it's not just about the here and now. This has just happened and I don't know how to relate to anybody else, but I can see how maybe this path starts to change, like I say, in that sort of how the world goes around in that sort of jar picture that you mentioned before.
Yeah, and we've had people that joined at the beginning of Harry's Rainbow. They've been with us for 12 years. So Harry's Rainbow don't have a waiting list, and they don't have, and it's not like 6 weeks and you're out. If you join at one, you're there till you're 25. If you want to, you dip in and out. It because we know how important that lifelong support is, and going back to schools and that pivotal part they can play in the support for the bereavement. And you're absolutely right. It's, you're holding the space for that young person, and you're holding the space for them to be who they need to be at that given moment in time, with helicoptering in if you need to give therapeutic support or offer it. But that's really powerful, to hold that space and say, I'm not expecting you to be any different than you are now, because we get it. We're here,
Yeah.
and we're here for you, and we're not going to berate you for your behavior, and we're not going to send you into timeout or whatever it is in secondary schools these days. Actually, we're going to sit and have a conversation, say, right, what's going on?
And I know we said finally earlier on, but I think we could probably chat all day. But I just thought, just as as we round up, you mentioned the idea of the 5 stages of grief, and I think maybe that's something that maybe people will have heard, or they believe there's a certain pattern. So let's just finish on that in terms of, like I say, your experience in how that people might be able to relate to that or understand that in a different way.
Yeah, so I mean, you find if you type in grief in Google, that's one of the first things that comes up in a lot of the sort of grief journals. It's the first thing that comes up, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I believe it was written for service men, and I don't know, or service people, but I don't know whether it was for through loss or PTSD. But the premise is that there's these 5 stages that you've got denial, anger, etc., and then you just accept the acceptance. But that is just it's you can feel all of those in 1 minute. You might feel none of them. They're definitely not linear. It's not denial, next. It just is not like that at all. And I think if there's one thing that people take away is to completely ignore the 5 stages of grief because they do not exist. Um, not like they're written. I think yes, that you come to a peace with the bereavement because you can't control it. So over time, there's that peace with what's happened. Um, yes, at the beginning, you might go into denial, but it's not denial of what's happened. It's just a complete shutdown. It's almost like your body's and brain's gone into shock. You can't compute what's happened. So you're not denying it. It's just, I can't compute it. So I think key takeaway is bin the 5 stages of grief, ignore them. There's some lovely images, but ignore them. I'm sorry to whoever wrote it, but I think even they'd agree that it wasn't for
Mhm.
grief. Um, and just accept that this is a lifelong journey, which is full of a huge range of emotions that you're trying to deal with all in one go and can be all consuming and overwhelming. And like you said, I think you said that beautifully, is that just be there to hold the space for them.
Yeah. Now, we always finish with the acronym FIRE by including feedback, inspiration, resilience, and empowerment. What is it that strikes you when you see that, whether it's one word or collectively?
Well, in fact, I'm gonna choose 3 of them
Okay.
because I think, in terms of that support, because that's what we're talking about, that support for people that have been bereaved, it's supporting them to develop that resilience over time. It's empowering them to to thrive over time. If we take that young girl who was able to read that poem, that's empowerment. And actually, it's to take the inspiration from people
Mhm.
because there's some incredibly inspiring situations and stories despite the absolute tragedy of grief. And, let's just finish on Odette Mould MBE, who is unbelievably inspiring. And like I say, if anybody ever comes across her, you will never forget her because she took that just the most tragic grief, losing a child, losing a twin, and turned it into what is one of, I mean, I just think it's incredibly inspirational charity, and what we do today. And not long ago this year, we registered our 1,000th child, and we all sat in the office thinking, this is not something to celebrate because this is the 1,000th child of Milton Keynes that's been bereaved, and that's not touching the
Mm.
sides really, but it's 1,000 children that we have been able to support their resilience and empower them to have a brighter tomorrow.
Yeah. Amazing. Marie Claire, thank you so much for chatting. Do tell people where they can go and find out more information. And I guess the website is obviously the best place to start.
Yeah, so Harry's Rainbow, if you type it in, Harry's Rainbow, Milton Keynes, the website will come up. And just go on there. If you are in Milton Keynes or surrounding areas and you have it's a sibling or parent, um, please go in and register. It's really simple. So on the website, there's a page and there's a registration page. You put in your details, and one of our lovely family liaison officers, we've only got 2, we're a very small charity, they will give you a call and talk through what you need. Um, please reach out because it is a very positive, empowering space to be. You will feel less lonely. You will have a brighter tomorrow, and you will be part of, a community that holds the space for you. And I think like I say, that's a lovely way to put it. So yeah, please go on, go and have a look.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of this today. It's such an important conversation, I think, and I'm really pleased that we can have it and open up hopefully somebody who's in a position to be able to help and support in whatever way that looks. And so yeah, keep up the great work and keep helping all those amazing people who need that support. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.